The whistle of the train tore through the Montana air like a wounded animal, but Willow Northcott didn't turn her head. Not even when the locomotive's wheels began to grind against the tracks. Not even when the plume of black smoke billowed into the clear blue sky of Mineral Park in the summer of 1876. Her eyes remained fixed on the dusty Main Street, her valise clutched in white-knuckled fingers. She had promised herself she wouldn't look back, wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction, especially not him. The train left and no one looked back. A deep voice drawled from behind her. "But I'm looking right at you, Willow." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that voice. Had dreamed of it. Had tried desperately to forget it. Grant Rivers stood just a few paces away, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. His dark hat was tipped low over eyes the color of thunderclouds, but she could feel their intensity even without seeing them fully. "You missed your train," he said simply, taking a step closer. "I decided not to go." Willow squared her shoulders, fighting the urge to step back, or worse, step forward. "Mineral Park has been my home for 2 years now. I'm not leaving because of complications." Grant's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. "Is that what we're calling it? A complication? What would you call it?" she challenged, finally meeting his gaze directly. "A near betrothal broken over a misunderstanding, a scandal that has the whole town talking. Or perhaps just another notch in your gun belt, Mr. Rivers." His face hardened. "You know that's not fair." The street around them had grown quiet. Willow was acutely aware of curtains twitching in shop windows, of conversations hushing as people strained to listen. Mineral Park thrived on gossip like desert plants on rare rainfall, and the turbulent relationship between the town's schoolteacher and the rancher's son had provided ample nourishment these past months. "Fair," Willow laughed, the sound brittle even to her own ears. "Was it fair when I found you with Harriet Sullivan at the Founders' Day dance? Was it fair when you told everyone we were practically engaged, then couldn't even remember to come to dinner with my parents when they visited from Boston?" "I explained about Harriet, you explained nothing that made sense," she interrupted, adjusting her bonnet against the sun's glare. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a classroom to prepare for Monday." Grant stepped directly into her path. "No, not this time, Willow. You've been avoiding me for weeks. We're going to talk. There's nothing left to say. There's everything left to say." His voice dropped, becoming softer, more private despite their public setting. "I've been a fool. The biggest damn, pardon me, the biggest fool in Montana territory. But I never betrayed you. Not once." A wagon rattled past, the driver tipping his hat to Willow while eyeing Grant with curiosity. She waited until it passed before responding. "Then why was your arm around her waist? Why were you whispering in her ear?" "Because she was crying about Thomas leaving her for the gold fields, and she didn't want anyone to see." Grant stepped closer, close enough that Willow could smell the leather of his vest and the faint scent of the pine soap he favored. "She's my cousin's wife's sister, Willow. Nothing more. And the missed dinner. My father sent me to handle a cattle rustling problem at the North Pasture. I tried to send word, but the messenger never delivered it." His eyes searched hers. "Ask Sheriff Miller if you don't believe me. He was there when we caught them." Willow swallowed, uncertainty creeping in where righteous indignation had been so firmly rooted. I would need more than words, Grant. Trust once broken, I know." He nodded, a movement so slight it barely disturbed the brim of his hat. "That's why I bought out the entire dining car on that train you just missed. Every last seat." "You what?" Grant's lips curved into a genuine smile this time. "I figured if you were leaving, I'd go with you. If you stayed, well." He gestured toward the station building. "I have a private dinner set up in the station master's office. Jenkins owed me a favor. I'm prepared to explain everything, answer any question, right any wrong, but I'm not letting you walk away without fighting for what we have, Willow." She stared at him, this man who had upended her carefully ordered life from the moment she'd stepped off the stagecoach 2 years ago. Fresh from Teachers College in Massachusetts, she'd come west to forge her own path, to escape the suffocating expectations of Boston society. She hadn't expected to find someone like Grant Rivers, educated despite his frontier upbringing, passionate about books as well as horses, determined yet gentle. "The entire dining car," she finally asked. "Every seat. Cost me a month's wages. That's extravagant." "Worth every penny if you'll hear me out." A woman hurried past, casting a scandalized glance their way. Standing in the middle of the street, having what appeared to be a lover's quarrel wasn't helping Willow's reputation as the respectable schoolteacher. "1 hour," she conceded. "I'll give you 1 hour to explain." Relief washed over his features. "That's all I ask." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand lightly upon it. They walked toward the station in silence, each step stirring dust that glowed golden in the waning light. Willow tried to maintain her emotional distance, to remember all the reasons she'd been ready to leave Mineral Park forever. But with Grant's solid presence beside her, she found herself hoping against her better judgment that he truly did have explanations for everything. The station master's office had been transformed. Gone were the schedules and mail bags, replaced by a white-clothed table set with the railroad's finest china. A small vase of wildflowers, the same purple lupine she'd once mentioned, were her favorites, served as a centerpiece. "Miss Northcott." Grant pulled out her chair with a formal bow that seemed both playful and sincere. As Willow sat, she noticed a leather-bound book beside her plate. She reached for it, recognizing the title instantly, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. "My copy disappeared weeks ago," she said, running her fingers over the familiar cover. "I assumed one of my students had borrowed it without asking." "I borrowed it," Grant admitted, taking his seat across from her. "Open it." Between the pages, serving as a bookmark, was a pressed lupine bloom, its color still vibrant despite being dried. And beneath it, a note in Grant's distinctive handwriting. "In the hopes you might teach me some sense, as I fear I have entirely too much sensibility where you are concerned." Willow felt her resolve weakening. "When did you write this?" "The day after I asked permission to court you formally, 3 months ago." He poured her a glass of lemonade from a crystal pitcher. "I was going to give it to you after dinner with your parents, along with something else." Her heart quickened. "Something else?" Grant reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This isn't how I planned it. I had a whole speech prepared, had practiced it with my horse until poor Thunderbolt was probably sick of hearing it." He placed the pouch on the table between them. "I'm not opening it," he said. "Not yet, because I want you to hear everything first and then decide if you even want to know what's inside." Willow's gaze fixed on the small velvet bundle, her mouth suddenly dry despite the lemonade. "Tell me about Harriet first." Grant nodded, settling back in his chair. "Harriet's husband Thomas announced he was leaving for the gold fields in Idaho the day before the Founders' Day dance. He didn't ask her opinion, didn't consider that she might not want to leave her sister and the life they'd built here. Just told her to pack up. She was devastated." He took a sip of his own lemonade before continuing. "She found me at the dance and was in tears, but didn't want to cause a scene. I took her to the side of the hall, let her cry on my shoulder, and promised I'd talk some sense into Thomas. That's when you saw us. She was holding on to you like a lifeline," Willow remembered, the image still sharp in her mind. She was distraught. "And yes, I was whispering, telling her that Thomas was being a fool, that I'd speak with him, that she didn't have to go if she didn't want to, nothing inappropriate." And did you speak with Thomas? Grant's expression darkened. I did. Knock some sense into that thick skull of his. He's still here, isn't he? Opened that harness shop he'd been talking about for years instead of chasing fool's gold. Willow considered this. It was true that Thomas Sullivan had abruptly abandoned his plans to seek his fortune in the goldfields. At the time, she'd been too caught up in her own hurt to connect it with Grant's intervention. The dinner with my parents, she prompted. Grant sighed. That was the worst timing imaginable. My father got word that the Jensen gang had been spotted near our north pasture. They'd already hit 2 other ranches, stolen nearly 30 head of cattle. Pa couldn't go himself, his leg was still healing from that fall. He asked me to lead the men out there. You could have sent word. I did. I gave a message to young Billy Peterson, paid him 2 bits to deliver it to you directly. Grant's jaw tightened. Found out 2 weeks later that he spent the money on candy and never delivered it. By then, you wouldn't speak to me long enough to hear an explanation. Willow remembered how she'd sat with her parents at the river's dining table. The empty chair across from her, a glaring reminder of what she'd thought was Grant's indifference. How her father had made pointed comments about the unreliability of Western men. How her mother had squeezed her hand beneath the table in silent sympathy. We caught the rustlers, Grant continued. Sheriff Miller was there, 3 days in the saddle with no sleep, but we recovered most of the cattle. I heard about that, Willow admitted. People were talking about it at church that Sunday. I came straight to your boarding house afterward, still covered in trail dust. Mrs. Holloway wouldn't let me pass the front parlor, said you'd left strict instructions not to admit me. Willow winced, remembering her landlady's pinched expression as she delivered that particular message. I was hurt. I know. And I should have tried harder, should have found a way to make you listen. Grant leaned forward, his eyes earnest. I'm not perfect, Willow. I've made my share of mistakes, but betraying you has never been one of them. A knock at the door interrupted them. The station master entered, followed by a porter carrying covered dishes that smelled deliciously of roast beef and fresh bread. Your dinner, Mr. Rivers, Jenkins the station master announced with a flourish. Just as arranged. Thank you, Jenkins. We won't need anything else for a while. Once they were alone again, Grant served Willow a generous portion of the meal. For several minutes, they ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware against china and the distant whistle of the train as it continued its journey eastward without them. Why didn't you get on that train? Grant finally asked, setting down his fork. You had your ticket. Your valise was packed. Willow dabbed her lips with the napkin, buying time to organize her thoughts. I stood on that platform watching people board, listening to the conductor's calls, and suddenly I realized I was running away, something I promised myself I'd never do again. Again. She nodded slowly. I ran from Boston because my parents had arranged a suitable marriage for me, the son of my father's business partner, a perfectly respectable man with perfectly respectable prospects whom I couldn't bear the thought of spending my life with. She met Grant's eyes. I came west to find my own path, make my own choices. Running back east because of a misunderstanding, even a painful one, felt like admitting defeat. And that's the only reason you stayed. Pride. No. Willow's voice softened. I stayed because despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of never seeing Mineral Park again, never seeing my students again. She paused. Never seeing you again. Hope flickered across Grant's features, but he tempered it with caution. Even though you believed the worst of me. Perhaps because deep down, I knew there had to be more to the story. I just wasn't ready to hear it. She glanced at the small velvet pouch that still lay between them. What's in there, Grant? Instead of answering directly, he asked. Do you remember when we rode out to Eagle Bluff last autumn? You told me about your grandmother's ring, the one with the small sapphire that your grandfather had saved 3 years to buy her. Willow nodded, the memory washing over her. A perfect October day, leaves turning gold, the mountains sharp against the blue sky. They'd shared a picnic and talked for hours, more freely than she'd ever spoken with anyone. You said it wasn't the grandest ring, but it meant more because of the love and sacrifice it represented, Grant continued. That stuck with me. With careful movements, he picked up the pouch and loosened its drawstring. I wrote to your father 2 months ago, asking for his blessing. He wasn't enthusiastic, made it clear he thought his daughter could do better than a Montana rancher, but said the choice would be yours. He tipped the contents into his palm. A delicate gold ring with a small but brilliantly blue sapphire flanked by 2 tiny pearls. It's not from a fancy Boston jeweler. I found the sapphire myself, up in the hills where there's that old abandoned claim. Had Mr. Finch the silversmith said it. Willow's breath caught. You found the stone yourself. Spent 20 Sundays looking for it. Wanted something that would be uniquely yours. Something that came from this land we both love. He held the ring between his thumb and forefinger, where it caught the last golden rays of sunlight streaming through the office window. I'm not asking you to wear it. Not yet. I'm just showing you that my intentions have always been honorable, even when appearances suggested otherwise. Tears pricked at Willow's eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to give in to emotion before she was certain. Why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? After the dinner, after the dance. Pride, I suppose. Grant carefully returned the ring to its pouch. I was hurt that you'd think so little of me, that you wouldn't even hear me out. Then, when I tried to explain, you shut me out completely. After a while, it seemed easier to let you go than to keep fighting for someone who didn't want to be fought for. Until today. Until I heard you'd bought a ticket east, the thought of you actually leaving. He shook his head. Suddenly, my pride didn't seem so important anymore. Willow reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I need time, Grant, to process everything you've told me, to trust again. He turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting. I understand. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. But I do have one question. She held his gaze steadily. If I had gotten on that train, would you really have followed me east? For the first time since they sat down, Grant's serious expression broke into a full smile, the one that had first captured her heart. Willow Northcott, I would have followed you to the ends of the earth. Boston would have been merely the first stop. Despite herself, Willow smiled back. You would have been miserable in Boston. Completely. He squeezed her hand gently. But I'd have been more miserable without you, no matter where I was. As the evening shadows lengthened across Mineral Park, something fragile began to mend between them. Not completely, there were still conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt, but the foundation was there, stronger perhaps for having been tested. The train had left, and Willow hadn't looked back. But Grant had been looking at her all along, seeing more clearly than she'd given him credit for. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly look back at him, not with suspicion or hurt, but with the first glimmer of renewed hope. When they finally emerged from the station, the stars were beginning to appear in the twilight sky. Grant offered his arm once more, and this time Willow took it without hesitation. May I walk you home? He asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that tugged at her heart. Yes, she replied simply. I'd like that very much. They moved slowly through the quiet streets of Mineral Park, their shadows merging into one in the light of the occasional street lamp. Neither rushed to fill the silence with words. For now, walking side by side was enough. As summer deepened in Mineral Park, the days grew longer and hotter, but Willow found herself too preoccupied to mind the heat. The school term was ending, and with it came the usual flurry of final lessons, examinations, and the year-end celebration where her students would demonstrate their learning for proud parents. But beyond her teaching duties, Willow's thoughts were increasingly occupied with Grant Rivers. True to his word, he had given her space to process everything he'd told her that evening in the station master's office. He hadn't pressured her for an answer about their future, hadn't tried to rush her decision. Instead, he had simply re-established his place in her life through small, consistent actions. He appeared at church each Sunday, tipping his hat to her from across the aisle but not presuming to sit beside her. He sent occasional notes, not romantic declarations, but thoughtful observations about books they'd both read or news of interest from around the territory. Once, he left a perfect lupine bloom on the schoolhouse steps, a simple reminder of their conversation without demanding a response. Willow found herself looking forward to these small gestures, even anticipating them. Gradually, her hurt began to heal, replaced by a cautious warmth whenever Grant was near. On a particularly sweltering Tuesday afternoon in late June, Willow dismissed her students early. The schoolroom had become unbearably stuffy, and not even opening all the windows provided relief. "Read chapters 7 and 8 for tomorrow," she called after them as they rushed toward freedom. "And don't forget your arithmetic worksheets." Only young Emily Parker lingered, her freckled face serious beneath her neatly braided hair. At 12, she was one of Willow's brightest students, with a perceptiveness that sometimes caught her teacher off guard. "Is something troubling you, Emily?" Willow asked, gathering papers from her desk. The girl twisted her hands in her apron. "Not exactly troubling, Miss Northcott, just wondering something." "And what might that be? Are you and Mr. Rivers going to get married? Pa says the whole town's placing bets on when, not if." Willow nearly dropped the stack of essays she was holding. "That is hardly an appropriate topic for discussion, Emily Parker." "I know." The girl had the grace to look somewhat abashed, though curiosity still shone in her eyes. "But Ma says you seem happier lately. And Mr. Rivers came to our farm last week to help Pa with that broken fence, and when your name came up, he smiled in a way that made Ma say that man's in love if I ever saw it." Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. "The relationship between Mr. Rivers and myself is private, Emily." "Yes, madam." Emily nodded, but then added, "I think you'd make a good wife for him. You're smart and pretty, and he looks at you like Pa looks at Ma sometimes." With that parting observation, Emily darted out the door, leaving Willow to collapse into her chair with a mixture of embarrassment and amusement. Was the entire town of Mineral Park truly speculating about her romantic future? The thought was mortifying, yet strangely touching as well. As she fanned herself with a student's drawing tablet, Willow acknowledged that Emily's innocent question had forced her to confront her own feelings more directly than she had allowed herself to do. The truth was, Grant's patience and understanding these past weeks had affected her deeply. He was giving her time without giving up, showing a steadfastness of character that spoke more loudly than any words could have. The sound of a wagon approaching broke into her thoughts. Looking out the window, she saw Grant himself pulling up in front of the schoolhouse, driving his father's light buggy rather than riding horseback as he usually did. Willow quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her collar, acutely aware of her flushed cheeks and the wisps of hair that had escaped her pins in the heat. By the time Grant knocked at the schoolhouse door, she had managed to compose herself, at least outwardly. "Afternoon, Miss Northcott." He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame blocking much of the light. He dressed with care, she noticed, wearing a clean shirt and his good vest despite the heat. "Mr. Rivers, This is an unexpected visit. I hope it's not unwelcome." He stepped inside, glancing around the empty classroom. "You've let the children go early." The heat was becoming unbearable. She gestured toward the vacant desks. "Even the most dedicated scholars find it difficult to concentrate when they're wilting like weak old flowers." Grant smiled, and Willow felt that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "I can't blame them. It's a scorcher today." "Did you need something in particular, Mr. Rivers?" "Grant," he corrected gently. "We're well past Mr. Rivers by now, don't you think?" She conceded with a nod. "Grant, then. I came to offer you an escape from this oven." He moved closer, stopping a respectful distance from her desk. "My mother sent me to fetch you. She's organized an impromptu picnic down by Cottonwood Creek where it's cooler. She says she won't take no for an answer, as you've been working too hard and need a proper meal in the fresh air." Willow hesitated. Margaret Rivers was a formidable woman, kind but determined. If she had decided Willow needed a picnic, resistance would likely be futile. And the thought of the cool, shaded banks of Cottonwood Creek was undeniably tempting. "Your mother is very thoughtful," she said, "but I wouldn't want to impose on a family gathering." "It's not just family. Sheriff and Mrs. Miller will be there. Dr. Wilson and his wife, too." Grant paused, then added with a twinkle in his eye, "Though I suspect my mother may have invited them specifically to make you feel more comfortable accepting the invitation." Willow laughed softly. "Your mother is quite strategic. She is that." He extended his hand. "So will you come? I promise to have you back at your boarding house by a respectable hour." Looking at his outstretched hand, Willow made a decision. It was time to stop holding Grant at arm's length, time to allow herself to embrace the possibility of what they might become together. "I'd be delighted," she said, placing her hand in his. The touch sent a current of awareness through her, and from the slight widening of Grant's eyes, she knew he felt it too. For a moment, they stood connected by that simple point of contact, the schoolroom fading around them. Then Grant gently squeezed her fingers before releasing them. "The buggy's outside. Shall we?" The drive to Cottonwood Creek was nothing short of magical. Grant kept the horse at an easy pace, allowing a breeze to cool them as they traveled the dusty road leading away from town. Willow found herself relaxing, enjoying the play of sunlight through the leaves and the distant shimmer of the mountains. Their conversation flowed naturally, touching on town happenings, the progress of Grant's younger siblings in school, and books they'd both recently read. It struck Willow how easily they fell back into the comfortable rapport they'd shared before their misunderstanding, yet now with a deeper appreciation for what they'd almost lost. "I've missed this," Grant said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "Just talking with you. Being with you without that wall between us." "I've missed it too," she admitted. "More than I allowed myself to recognize." He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm ready to move forward, Grant." Willow met his gaze steadily. "I believe your explanations. I trust that you never meant to hurt me, and I." She took a deep breath. "I care for you very deeply." The buggy slowed as Grant's attention shifted fully to her words. "Willow," he began, his voice thick with emotion, but they had arrived at their destination. Ahead, beneath a canopy of massive cottonwood trees, a cheerful gathering was already underway. Blankets had been spread on the grass near the creek, laden with food baskets. Margaret Rivers was directing the placement of chairs while Sheriff Miller and Dr. Wilson appeared to be engaged in a good-natured argument about fishing techniques. "We'll continue this conversation later," Grant promised, his eyes conveying what words couldn't in their public setting. Then, with a smile that made Willow's heart flutter, he added, "I've waited this long. I can wait a few hours more." The picnic proved to be exactly what Willow needed. The spot Margaret had chosen caught the perfect balance of shade and breeze, making the summer heat bearable. The food was abundant, and delicious fried chicken, potato salad, fresh biscuits still warm from the oven, and thick slices of Margaret's famous apple pie for dessert. Conversation flowed easily among the small group. Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Wilson drew Willow into a discussion about the town's plans to expand the library, while the men debated the merits of different cattle breeds for the Montana climate. It was comfortable, civilized, and thoroughly enjoyable throughout it all. Willow was acutely aware of Grant's presence. Though they weren't seated beside each other, Margaret's careful arrangement had placed Willow between herself and Mrs. Wilson. Their eyes met frequently across the circle. Each time, Willow felt that same flutter of connection, that same certainty that something important was taking shape between them. As the afternoon waned, Sheriff Miller suggested a walk along the creek. The group split naturally, the older couples following one path, while Grant and Willow found themselves directed toward another that led upstream. "My mother is not exactly subtle," Grant chuckled as they walked side by side, just close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. "She means well," Willow replied, enjoying the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves overhead. "She's been nothing but kind to me, even during our misunderstanding." "She knew I was in the right," Grant said with mock seriousness, then laughed at Willow's raised eyebrow. "All right, she actually lectured me thoroughly about clear communication and not assuming you would automatically understand my absences. Said I needed to court you properly or risk losing the best thing that ever happened to me. Your mother is a wise woman. That she is." Grant paused by a fallen log that created a natural bench overlooking a bend in the creek. "Shall we sit for a moment?" They settled on the smooth wood, close but not touching, watching the clear water flow over stones worn smooth by time. Dragonflies skimmed across the surface, their wings iridescent in the sunlight. "About what you said in the buggy," Grant began carefully, "about being ready to move forward." Willow nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes. I want to be clear about what that means for both of us." He turned slightly to face her more directly. "Because I don't want any more misunderstandings between us, Willow. Nor do I. When I look to the future," Grant said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words, "I see you as my partner, my confidante, my wife." The word hung in the air between them, filled with possibility. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he continued. "I know we still have healing to do, but I want you to know that my intentions haven't changed from the day I searched for that sapphire in the hills." Willow looked down at her hands folded in her lap, then back up into Grant's earnest face. "My answer hasn't changed either," she said softly. "Even when I was hurt and angry, even when I thought you had betrayed my trust, I never stopped loving you, Grant. I just buried it beneath pride and pain." His eyes widened at her use of the word loving, hope blazing across his features. "Willow, are you saying—" "I'm saying that I love you." The words, once released, flowed freely. "I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you care for your family and this land. I love that you understand my need for independence while still wanting to build a life together." Grant reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. "I've loved you since the first day I saw you struggling with your luggage outside the stagecoach office, looking determined despite being clearly overwhelmed. You were the most beautiful, most stubborn woman I'd ever laid eyes on." A laugh bubbled up from Willow's chest. "I thought you were insufferably arrogant, offering help I hadn't asked for. I was trying to be chivalrous. You practically snatched my valise from my hands and told me little ladies shouldn't carry such heavy things." Grant winced at the memory. "Not my finest moment." "I got better, though, didn't I? You did. She squeezed his hand. You learned to ask before helping, to see me as capable rather than fragile. And you learned to accept help sometimes without seeing it as a threat to your independence, he countered with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the creek and birdsong filling the air around them. So where do we go from here? Willow finally asked. In answer, Grant reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the familiar velvet pouch. I've been carrying this with me every day, waiting for the right moment. He held it out to her. Would you at least consider wearing it now? Not as an engagement, not yet, unless you want it to be, but as a promise that we're moving toward that future together. With slightly trembling fingers, Willow accepted the pouch and loosened the drawstring. The sapphire ring slid out into her palm, even more beautiful than she remembered from that evening in the station master's office. The blue stone caught the light, seeming to glow from within. It's perfect, she whispered. Grant took the ring and held it poised at the tip of her finger. May I? When she nodded, he slipped it onto her finger with reverence. It fit perfectly, as if made for her hand alone. Not an engagement, Willow clarified, though her voice was tender. Not yet. But a promise. A promise, Grant agreed. That we'll face whatever comes together with honesty and trust. And love, she added. Always that. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles just above where the ring now rested. Always love. The sound of voices in the distance reminded them they weren't truly alone. Their companions would soon return from their own walks, and propriety would once again dictate a certain distance between them. We should head back, Willow said reluctantly. Grant stood and offered his hand to help her up. This time, she took it without hesitation, allowing him to draw her to her feet. For a moment they stood very close, their joined hands between them, the ring catching the golden afternoon light. May I call on you properly tomorrow evening? Grant asked. We could sit in Mrs. Holloway's front parlor under her watchful eye, as befits a proper courtship. Willow smiled up at him. I would like that very much. As they walked back toward the picnic site, Willow was aware of a lightness in her step that had been missing for too long. The train had left Mineral Park that day, but she had stayed. Grant had looked right at her when everyone else had looked away. And now, step by step, they were building a path forward together. By the time they reached the others, the sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the creek. Margaret Rivers noticed the ring immediately, her keen eyes missing nothing, but she simply smiled with quiet satisfaction and said nothing, a restraint that Willow suspected cost her considerably. The drive back to town as twilight descended was filled with a comfortable silence, broken occasionally by soft observations about the beauty of the evening or memories of the pleasant afternoon. Grant drove with one hand, the other resting lightly atop Willow's where it lay on the seat between them. When they reached her boarding house, Grant handed her down from the buggy with careful courtesy, mindful of watching eyes behind lace curtains. Mrs. Holloway was notorious for her vigilant protection of her boarders' reputations. Until tomorrow evening, he said, his voice carrying a promise that made Willow's heart beat faster. Until tomorrow, she echoed, and with a final smile turned to climb the steps to the porch. Just before entering, she paused to look back. Grant still stood beside the buggy, watching her just as he had promised he always would. The days that followed took on a sweet rhythm that reminded Willow of a dance, measured steps forward, occasional pauses to find their balance, but always moving in harmony toward a shared future. Grant called on her regularly, sometimes at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, sometimes escorting her on walks through town or drives into the surrounding countryside. Mineral Park society observed their rekindled courtship with interest and general approval. Willow caught whispers and smiles as they passed, noticed how the mercantile owner suddenly had new items he thought the future Mrs. Rivers might appreciate, and endured good-natured teasing from her students about Mr. Rivers waiting by the schoolhouse gate again, Miss Northcott. July brought Independence Day celebrations that transformed the town. Bunting decorated storefronts, a parade marched down Main Street, and the evening concluded with a dance in the town hall that rivaled the Founders' Day festivities in grandeur. Grant claimed Willow for the first waltz, leading her onto the floor with a confidence that drew admiring glances. As they moved together to the strains of the small orchestra, Willow was reminded of another dance months ago, one that had ended in tears and misunderstanding. How different things were now, with Grant's hand warm and steady at her waist, his eyes never leaving hers as they circled the floor. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how far we've come since the last town dance," she replied honestly. "How close we came to losing this." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "But we didn't lose it. That's what matters now." "Yes," she agreed, allowing herself to move a fraction closer within the bounds of propriety. "That's what matters." Later that evening, as fireworks burst overhead and the townspeople oohed and awed at the spectacle, Grant led Willow away from the crowd to a quiet spot behind the town hall. In the intermittent flashes of colored light, his expression was both serious and hopeful. "I've been patient," he began, taking both her hands in his. "I've given you time to be sure of your feelings, of my character, and I've treasured every moment of our courtship these past weeks." Willow's pulse quickened. "As have I. But I find myself growing impatient, Willow." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Not for an answer, I'll wait as long as you need for that, but for clarity about what you're considering." "I'm not sure I understand." Grant took a deep breath. "The promise ring you're wearing beautifully, I might add, has caused some confusion in town. Some people believe we're already engaged but keeping it quiet. Others think we're merely courting with no formal understanding. Does it matter what others think?" Willow asked, genuinely curious about his concern. "Not to me, but it might to you, especially as the schoolteacher." He released one of her hands to gently touch the sapphire ring. "More importantly, I want to be clear between ourselves. If you're ready, I'd like to make this an official engagement. If you're not, I'll keep courting you until you are." The directness of his proposal, stripped of flowery language but filled with sincerity, touched Willow deeply. This was the Grant she had fallen in love with, straightforward, honorable, respectful of her need for clarity as much as her need for time. A particularly brilliant red firework exploded above them, illuminating Grant's face in crimson light that faded to blue. In that shifting glow, Willow made her decision. "I don't need more time," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion filling her chest. "I know what I want, Grant. I want a future with you. So yes, let's make this an official engagement." The joy that transformed his features was more spectacular than any firework. "Truly? You're certain?" "Completely." Grant lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around once before setting her gently back on the ground, suddenly mindful of who might see them. "I'm the happiest man in Montana territory," he declared. "And when shall this official engagement lead to a wedding?" Willow asked, practical even in her happiness. Grant's smile turned thoughtful. "That's for you to decide. I'd marry you tomorrow if you were willing, but I know you might want more time to prepare, to perhaps write your parents." Willow winced slightly at the mention of her parents. "They may not approve." "Because I'm a rancher's son and not a Boston businessman, partly. But also because they had such different plans for me," she sighed. "They've never quite forgiven me for coming west instead of making the match they arranged." Grant's expression grew serious. Would you like me to write to them, man to man as it were? I could explain my prospects, my intentions, my deep love and respect for their daughter. The offer touched her deeply. You would do that, of course. I want them to know that while you may not have followed their plans, you found happiness and security here. That you'll be loved and honored as their daughter deserves. Willow stood on tiptoe to place a kiss on his cheek, a daring public gesture even in the shadows. Write the letter. But know that whatever their response, my decision is made. I choose you, Grant Rivers. They rejoined the crowd as the final fireworks brightened the night sky, their clasped hands and radiant expressions telling the story without words. By morning, news of their official engagement had spread throughout Mineral Park, bringing congratulations from every quarter, even Mrs. Holloway unbent enough to serve a special engagement breakfast, though she insisted on chaperoning their subsequent parlor visits with even greater vigilance. Now that it's official, propriety is more important than ever, my dear. The summer weeks passed in a blur of happiness and preparation. Willow completed the school term, accepted the school board's offer to return in the fall, and began making tentative plans for a late August wedding. Grant divided his time between ranch responsibilities and preparing their future home, a charming house on the edge of his father's property, close enough to the main ranch for convenience, but private enough for a young couple beginning their life together. Letters were dispatched to Boston informing Willow's parents of the engagement. Grant wrote a lengthy, respectful letter to Mr. Northcott, detailing his family's standing in the community, the prosperity of the ranch, and most importantly, his unwavering commitment to Willow's happiness. Willow wrote to her mother separately, allowing herself to express the love and joy she had found, hoping it might soften her mother's disappointment at her choices. Their responses, when they finally arrived, were predictably mixed. Mr. Northcott's letter was civil but cool, acknowledging the engagement without explicitly giving his blessing. Mrs. Northcott's separate note to her daughter was warmer, expressing cautious happiness at Willow's evident joy and a tentative interest in perhaps visiting Montana someday, to see this wild country that has so captured our daughter's heart. It's more than I expected, Willow told Grant as they sat on the porch swing at the Rivers Ranch house one evening in early August. At least they're not openly opposed. They'll come around, Grant assured her, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. Once they visit and see how happy you are, how could they not? Always the optimist, she teased, leaning her head against his shoulder. Someone has to balance your practical nature. He pressed a kiss to her temple, a liberty that Margaret Rivers pretended not to notice from her rocking chair at the far end of the porch. As August progressed, wedding preparations began in earnest. Margaret took charge with efficiency, consulting Willow on her preferences while handling the countless details that Willow, with no female relatives nearby, might have found overwhelming. The church was reserved, invitations dispatched, and the women of Mineral Park rallied to ensure the town's most anticipated wedding of the year would be a beautiful celebration. Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Miller organized a sewing circle to help Willow prepare her trousseau, evenings filled with stitching and stories that made Willow feel truly part of the community she had chosen as her home. Even Mrs. Holloway contributed, presenting Willow with a hand-embroidered tablecloth. For your new dining table, my dear. 1 week before the wedding, as Willow was trying on her completed wedding dress in Mrs. Wilson's parlor, a commotion outside drew their attention. A fine carriage with matched bay horses had pulled up outside, unlike any regularly seen in Mineral Park. The driver, dressed in a formal uniform that looked decidedly out of place in the frontier town, was assisting a distinguished couple from the vehicle. Goodness, Mrs. Wilson murmured, peering out the window. They look like they've stepped straight out of a Boston drawing room. Willow froze, recognizing the erect posture of the gentleman and the familiar tilt of the lady's hat. They have, she whispered. Those are my parents. Your parents, Mrs. Wilson turned in surprise. But I thought they weren't coming. They weren't. Willow's hands fluttered nervously to her hair, her dress. At least, they never responded to the invitation. Mrs. Wilson immediately took charge. Well, we can't have them seeing you in your wedding dress before the ceremony. That's bad luck. Quickly now, change back into your regular clothes while I go welcome them properly. As Willow hurriedly changed, she could hear Mrs. Wilson's cheerful greeting outside, followed by her father's more reserved response, and her mother's higher-pitched questions. By the time she emerged from the bedroom, they had been ushered into Mrs. Wilson's parlor, looking as out of place among the simple frontier furnishings as peacocks in a barnyard. Mother, father, Willow moved forward to embrace them, emotion making her voice unsteady. I can't believe you're here. We couldn't miss our only daughter's wedding, her mother said, returning the embrace with surprising warmth. Though I must say, Willow, you might have chosen somewhere more accessible. The journey was positively grueling. The railroad only goes so far, Willow replied with a small smile. But I'm so glad you made the effort. Her father cleared his throat, looking around the modest parlor with barely concealed assessment. We've taken rooms at something called the Mineral Park Hotel, though hotel seems a generous description. It's the finest accommodation in town, Willow assured him. Mrs. Peterson keeps it spotlessly clean. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Mrs. Wilson tactfully suggested that Willow might like to show her parents around the town before dinner. And I believe Mr. Rivers would want to know of their arrival immediately, she added with a meaningful look. The next hour passed in a blur as Willow walked her parents down Main Street, pointing out the schoolhouse where she taught, the church where she would be married, and the various businesses that formed the heart of Mineral Park. Her father remained largely silent, while her mother made polite observations that couldn't quite hide her culture shock at the frontier surroundings. Grant met them outside the Mercantile, having received Mrs. Wilson's message. He approached with confidence tempered by respect, hat in hand, his Sunday suit hastily donned for the occasion. Mr. and Mrs. Northcott, what an honor to finally meet you. He extended his hand to Willow's father. Grant Rivers, sir, I appreciate you making such a long journey. Walter Northcott hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake, his Boston manners overriding his reservations. Mr. Rivers, your letters painted quite the picture of your establishment here. I'm interested to see how it compares to reality. I'd be happy to show you the ranch tomorrow, sir. It's about 5 miles outside town. We were hoping to see where our daughter will be living, Mrs. Northcott interjected, studying Grant with the keen assessment of a mother determining if a man was worthy of her child. Of course, madam. Grant smiled, undaunted by her scrutiny. I've just completed our home. It's not what you'd be accustomed to in Boston, but I believe it will be comfortable. Willow watched this exchange with a mixture of anxiety and pride. Grant was handling himself beautifully, neither intimidated by her father's formality nor off-putting in his frontier directness. He was simply himself, the man she had fallen in love with, confident in who he was and what he offered. Perhaps we could all dine together this evening, Grant suggested. My parents would be honored to meet you, and our cook has prepared a special meal in anticipation of your arrival. You knew we were coming. Mrs. Northcott looked surprised. We hoped, Grant corrected gently. Willow has spoken often of her wish to have you here for our wedding. We wanted to be prepared in case that wish came true. Something in his sincerity seemed to touch Mrs. Northcott. Her expression softened slightly. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Rivers. We would be pleased to accept your invitation." That evening's dinner at the Rivers Ranch house became a turning point. Margaret Rivers, understanding the importance of making a good impression, had transformed the dining room into a showcase of Western hospitality. The table gleamed with her best silver and china, fresh wildflowers arranged in crystal vases, and the food, while featuring local specialties, was presented with an elegance that clearly impressed Willow's mother. Conversation flowed more easily than Willow had dared hope. Her father and James Rivers, Grant's father, discovered a mutual interest in agricultural innovations. Her mother was charmed by Margaret's stories of establishing a genteel household in the Montana wilderness. Grant's younger siblings were on their best behavior, asking polite questions about Boston and listening with genuine interest to the answers. Throughout the evening, Willow watched her two worlds begin to merge: the Boston propriety she had been raised with, and the Montana straightforwardness she had come to love. They weren't perfectly aligned, perhaps never would be, but they were finding common ground in their shared care for her happiness. After dinner, as the ladies withdrew to the parlor while the men enjoyed cigars on the porch, Elizabeth Northcott took a moment to speak privately with her daughter. "He's not what I expected," she admitted, watching Grant through the window as he conversed easily with both fathers. "When you wrote about a Montana rancher, I imagined someone rougher." Willow smiled. "Grant is educated, Mother. He attended university in Denver before returning to help his father with the ranch. He reads Shakespeare and discusses politics, but he's also completely at home in this land in a way I've come to admire deeply. And he clearly adores you." Her mother's observation was matter-of-fact but carried approval. "That counts for a great deal in a marriage, Willow, more than I perhaps emphasized when you were younger." "More than in the match you and Father arranged?" Willow asked carefully. Her mother sighed. "Harold Whitmore would have provided well for you. But no, I don't believe he would have looked at you the way Grant Rivers does." She patted Willow's hand. "Your father may take longer to admit it, but I believe you've chosen wisely, daughter." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes. "Thank you, Mother. That means more than I can say." The remaining days before the wedding passed in a whirlwind. Willow's parents gradually adjusted to frontier life, her father finding unexpected interest in the operations of the Rivers Ranch, her mother forming a tentative friendship with Margaret Rivers based on their shared experience of raising spirited daughters. When the wedding day finally arrived, a perfect late August morning with clear skies and a gentle breeze, Willow stood before the mirror in Mrs. Wilson's guest room, barely recognizing herself in the elegant bride who looked back. Her dress, though simpler than what she might have worn in Boston, was beautifully made of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a sophisticated style, topped with a small wreath of fresh wildflowers instead of a veil, her choice, representing her embrace of this Montana life. "You look beautiful, daughter." Her father's voice came from the doorway where he stood in his formal suit, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Father." She turned to face him fully. "Are you very disappointed in me still?" Walter Northcott's customary reserve softened. "I was never disappointed in you, Willow. Concerned, perhaps. Worried that your headstrong nature would lead you to hardship." He stepped into the room, adjusting his cuffs in a nervous gesture she recognized from childhood. "I wanted security for you, the kind I understood. But I see now there are different kinds of security, different paths to happiness." He offered his arm. "I would be honored to walk you down the aisle to a man who clearly cherishes you, if you'll still have me as your escort." Willow placed her hand on his arm, tears threatening to ruin Mrs. Wilson's careful work with rice powder and rouge. I would love that more than anything. The small church of Mineral Park had never looked more beautiful. Wildflowers and ribbons decorated every pew, and sunlight streamed through the simple windows, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests. Every seat was filled not just with the prominent citizens but with Willow's students and their families, ranchers from the surrounding area, and even Mrs. Holloway, who sniffed disapprovingly at the frontier decorations while secretly dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. At the altar waited Grant, more handsome than Willow had ever seen him in a new suit ordered specially from Denver. His eyes never left her as she walked toward him on her father's arm, his expression a mixture of awe and joy that made her heart swell with answering love. When Walter Northcott placed Willow's hand in Grant's, then stepped back to join her mother in the front pew, the symbolic passing of responsibility was not lost on anyone present. But what the congregation also witnessed in that moment was something more profound, not just a father giving away his daughter, but two families recognizing a union that transcended their differences. The ceremony itself was simple and deeply moving. Willow and Grant had written their own vows, promises that spoke of partnership and respect alongside the traditional pledges of love and fidelity. When Grant placed the gold band alongside the sapphire engagement ring on Willow's finger, his hands were steady, but his voice caught with emotion. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, the traditional words carrying the weight of his heart's promise, "and pledge to you all that I am and all that I have." As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small church erupted in applause and cheers that reflected the town's genuine happiness for the couple. Even Willow's parents joined in, her mother openly weeping, her father applauding with dignified approval. The celebration afterward, held in the town square under a canopy of ribbons and lanterns, brought together all elements of Mineral Park society. There was dancing to fiddle music, a feast that combined Margaret River's finest recipes with contributions from every household in town, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the square, Grant led Willow away from the festivities toward a quiet corner where they could catch their breath and share a private moment. "Happy, Mrs. Rivers?" he asked, his hands resting lightly on her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "And you, husband? I have everything I ever wanted right here." He lowered his forehead to rest against hers. "When that train left and I saw you standing there, I knew I couldn't let you go without fighting for us. Best decision I ever made." "I'm glad you were looking right at me," she whispered, "when everyone else looked away. I'll always be looking at you, Willow. Every day for the rest of our lives." As the celebration continued around them, Willow and Grant shared their first quiet moment as husband and wife, a moment of stillness amid the joy, a promise amid the celebrations. The train had left Mineral Park that day months ago, but it had carried away doubts and misunderstandings rather than dreams. In their place had grown something stronger, something built on truth and trust and love that would endure long after the lanterns of their wedding night had dimmed. Autumn painted the hills surrounding Mineral Park in golds and crimsons as Willow settled into her new life. The little house Gran had prepared for them became a true home under her touch, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, bookshelves filled with volumes they both treasured, kitchen shelves stocked with preserves and staples for the winter ahead. Being a rancher's wife while continuing to teach presented challenges that Willow met with characteristic determination. She rose before dawn to prepare Grant's breakfast and pack his lunch if he was working the far pastures, then readied herself for the classroom. After school, she graded papers and prepared lessons at the kitchen table while starting dinner, finding a rhythm that allowed her to fulfill both roles. Grant supported her teaching career without reservation, often bringing the buggy to collect her on stormy afternoons, or helping her carry supplies for special projects. The sight of the tall rancher, patiently cutting shapes for her younger students' art lessons, or constructing a bookshelf for the schoolroom became familiar to Mineral Park residents, who remarked approvingly on the partnership the young couple demonstrated. Sundays became precious days of rest and togetherness. After church, they often rode out to favorite spots on River's land, a high meadow with views of distant mountains, a secluded bend in the creek, or simply around the ranch property, where Grant would point out improvements he envisioned for the future. These quiet hours, shared only between them, cemented their bond as they planned and dreamed together. As winter approached, Willow's parents prepared to return east. Their extended stay had allowed them to witness not just the wedding but the beginning of the marriage, and both had gradually come to appreciate the life their daughter had chosen. "You'll come visit us in Boston next summer?" her mother asked as they said their goodbyes at the station. "Your father has business interests that will keep us from traveling west again so soon, but we would dearly love to have you both." "We'll try, Mother," Willow promised, embracing her warmly. "Though summer is the busiest season on the ranch. Then perhaps the following spring." Elizabeth Northcott glanced at Grant. "I should like to show off my handsome son-in-law to our friends, and perhaps by then." Her gaze flickered meaningfully to Willow's midsection. Willow blushed at her mother's implication while Grant simply smiled. "We would be honored to visit when circumstances allow, Mrs. Northcott." Walter Northcott shook Grant's hand with genuine respect. "Take good care of our daughter, Mr. Rivers, and of this land of yours. I believe both have considerable potential." "Yes, sir, that's my intention." As the train pulled away, Willow felt a bittersweet pang. Unlike that fateful day months ago when she had refused to watch the departing train, today she waved until her parents' figures disappeared from view. Something had healed in her relationship with them, not perfect understanding, perhaps, but a mutual respect that felt like solid ground. "They'll come back," Grant said, his arm around her shoulders as they walked away from the station. "How can you be so sure?" "Because they love you. And because your father spent the entire visit taking notes on Montana land prices and cattle breeding techniques." Grant's eyes twinkled. "I suspect he's considering some Western investments." Willow laughed. "Trust my father to find a business opportunity in everything." Then more seriously, "I'm glad they came, Grant. Glad they had the chance to know you." "As am I." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now, Mrs. Rivers, shall we go home? I believe you promised to teach me how to make your mother's apple strudel recipe she shared." "You were paying attention to that." "I pay attention to everything that matters to you." The winter of 1876-77 proved to be one of the harshest in memory. Snow piled in drifts higher than fence posts, and temperatures dropped so low that the creek froze solid enough to walk across. School was frequently canceled when blizzards made travel impossible, and the Rivers Ranch operated on minimal routines focused on keeping the livestock alive and the family warm. Willow discovered unexpected satisfaction in the rhythms of winter ranch life. She learned to bake bread that rivaled Margaret's, mastered the art of darning socks by the fire, and spent long evenings reading aloud with Grant while wind howled outside their snug cabin. Sometimes Grant's younger siblings would trudge through the snow to visit, bringing news from the main house and staying for games of checkers or charades. In late January, as another snowstorm raged outside, Willow sat at their kitchen table watching Grant clean his revolver, a necessary task on a ranch where predators threatened livestock and personal protection could be essential. She had been counting days in her mind, checking and rechecking, and had finally become certain. "Grant," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I believe we'll need to add a cradle to your furniture-making projects this spring." His hand stilled immediately, the gun parts forgotten on the oiled cloth before him. "Willow." His voice held a question, hope and uncertainty mingled. "I'm almost certain," she confirmed, a smile blooming. "By late summer we should be welcoming a child." The joy that transformed his features was something Willow knew she would remember all her days. Grant crossed to her in 2 long strides, kneeling beside her chair to place a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in every syllable. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" She asked, though his expression left little doubt. "Pleased? Willow, I'm—" Words failed him. Instead, he gathered her carefully into his arms, holding her as if she had become something infinitely precious and fragile. "I've never been happier." That night, as they lay together in the darkness listening to the storm, Grant's protective arm around her waist, Willow marveled at how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. From nearly leaving Mineral Park forever to becoming deeply rooted here as wife, teacher, and soon to be mother, the journey had been unexpected but infinitely rewarding. "What are you thinking?" Grant murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "About that day at the train station. How close I came to leaving all this behind." He tightened his arm around her. "I try not to think about that, the possibility of a life without you in it." "But that's just it," she said, turning in his embrace to face him in the dimness. "Even when I was standing there with my ticket in hand, something kept me from boarding. As if my heart knew what my head hadn't accepted yet, that everything I truly wanted was here. I'm grateful every day that you stayed," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That you gave me the chance to explain, to make things right between us. And now we're creating a new life together." She guided his hand to rest on her stomach, in more ways than one. Grant's gentle kiss held promise and protection, love and commitment. Whatever challenges the future might hold, harsh winters, difficult harvests, the everyday complications of marriage and parenthood, Willow knew they would face them together. Their bond strengthened by the trust they had nearly lost, but ultimately deepened. Spring arrived late but gloriously to Montana territory. As the snow melted and creeks overflowed their banks with runoff from the mountains, new life emerged everywhere, tender green shoots pushing through mud, calves wobbling alongside their mothers in the pastures, wildflowers carpeting hillsides with color. Willow's condition became known throughout Mineral Park, bringing congratulations and advice from every quarter. The women of the town organized a quilting circle specifically to create a baby blanket, each square containing stitched wishes for the child's future. Margaret Rivers began knitting tiny garments at an impressive rate, while Dr. Wilson provided regular checkups and reassurances that all was progressing normally. Grant channeled his excitement into practical preparations, working late into the evenings to craft a cradle of polished pine, adding a rocking chair to their parlor, and expanding their vegetable garden to ensure plenty of fresh food for Willow and the baby. He became even more protective, insisting on driving her to and from school each day and arranging for a substitute teacher for the final month of the term. "I'm perfectly capable of teaching until summer break," Willow protested one evening as they sat on their porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky. "Women have been working while carrying children since the beginning of time." "I know you're capable," Grant replied, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on her now visible pregnancy. "But you don't have to prove it by exhausting yourself. The school board is happy to bring in Miss Peterson early, and your students will benefit from a smooth transition." Willow sighed, acknowledging the wisdom in his words even as she struggled with relinquishing her classroom earlier than necessary. "I suppose you're right, and it would give me time to prepare the house properly before the baby comes. And to rest," Grant added firmly. "Dr. Wilson was quite clear about that." As her pregnancy progressed through the summer months, Willow found herself grateful for the extra time at home. The Montana heat was oppressive, especially as her body changed and became less comfortable. She spent mornings working in the cooler hours, preparing and preserving food for the coming winter, organizing the small room that would become the nursery, and writing detailed lesson plans for her replacement. Afternoons were for rest, often spent reading on the porch swing or writing long letters to her parents in Boston, who had responded to news of the coming grandchild with enthusiasm and promises to visit after the birth. Sometimes Margaret Rivers would come by with freshly baked treats and practical advice, or Mrs. Wilson would stop in with new baby clothes sewn by the ladies of the church. In the evenings, when Grant returned from his work on the ranch, they would sit together talking about the future, sharing their hopes and occasionally their fears about parenthood. "What if I'm not good at it?" Grant admitted one night as they lay in bed, his hand gently caressing the mound of their growing child. "My father was often distant, loving in his way but not demonstrative. I don't want to be that kind of father." "You won't be," Willow assured him, covering his hand with hers. "I've seen you with your younger siblings, with my students. You connect with children naturally, with patience and humor." "That's different," he protested. "They're not my responsibility, not really. But you feel responsible anyway. It's your nature to care, to protect." She turned to look directly into his eyes. "Our child will be the most loved, most secure child in all of Montana territory. Of that, I have no doubt." Her confidence in him seemed to ease his worry, and as the summer progressed, Grant's excitement overshadowed his anxiety. He talked to the baby each evening, his deep voice rumbling against Willow's belly as he shared stories of his day, descriptions of the ranch and the wider world that awaited their child's arrival. August brought ripening gardens, the first hint of cooler evenings, and increasing anticipation as Willow's time drew near. Dr. Wilson began visiting twice weekly, nodding with satisfaction at her healthy condition while reminding her to continue resting as much as possible. "First babies often take their time in coming," he advised. "But everything appears to be progressing perfectly, Mrs. Rivers. Just keep doing as you are." On a perfect late summer evening, as golden light bathed the land, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant hills, Willow felt the first unmistakable pains that signaled their child's imminent arrival. Grant had just returned from helping his father repair a section of fence, his shirt dusty and his face tired but satisfied with the day's work. "Grant," she said calmly as he washed up at the kitchen basin, "I believe it's time to send for Dr. Wilson." He froze, water dripping from his hands. "The baby, now." "Well, not this instant," she clarified with a small smile. "But soon, I think. I've been having pains all afternoon, growing stronger and more regular." In an instant, his fatigue vanished, replaced by focused energy. "I'll saddle Thunderbolt and be back with the doctor before you know it. Do you need anything before I go? Should I send for my mother? Or Mrs. Wilson?" "Not yet. It will be hours still, from what all the women have told me." Willow moved to the rocking chair, easing herself down as another pain began to build. "But don't dawdle on the way back." Grant knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his still damp ones. "I'll fly there and back. You're not afraid?" "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm ready to meet our child, to begin this next chapter of our life together." He pressed a fervent kiss to her hands, then her lips. "I love you, Willow Rivers, more than I have words to express. I love you too. Now go, before this baby decides to arrive with only its father to welcome it." The hours that followed passed in a blur of increasing pain, interspersed with moments of surprising clarity. Dr. Wilson arrived promptly, his calm presence reassuring as he examined Willow and confirmed that all was proceeding normally. Margaret Rivers and Mrs. Wilson came soon after, bringing clean linens and practical experience to supplement the doctor's medical knowledge. Grant was gently but firmly excluded from the birthing room once labor intensified, relegated to pacing the porch where several of his ranch hands had gathered in solidarity, bringing coffee and quiet support as the night deepened. Inside, Willow found unexpected strength in the ancient process her body was undertaking. Each contraction brought pain but also purpose, each breath drawing her closer to the moment of meeting her child. The women surrounding her offered encouragement, cool cloths for her forehead, and steadying hands to grip when the pain crested. "You're doing beautifully, daughter," Margaret Rivers murmured, using the term of relationship that had grown between them over the past year. "Each pain brings your baby closer." Shortly after midnight, as a 3/4 moon cast silver light through the bedroom window, Willow's efforts culminated in a final powerful push, and the sound of a newborn's lusty cry filled the room. "A perfect son, Doctor," Wilson announced, lifting the squalling infant for her to see before quickly attending to the necessary medical procedures. Strong lungs and all fingers and toes accounted for. Tears of joy and relief streamed down Willow's face as Mrs. Wilson placed the swaddled bundle in her arms moments later. She looked down into a tiny, red face with a shock of dark hair and features that somehow combined her own with Grant's in a perfect new creation. "He's beautiful," she whispered, counting fingers and toes herself, marveling at the miniature perfection of his features. "Absolutely beautiful." "Shall I bring his father in now?" Margaret asked, already moving toward the door, knowing the answer. Grant entered cautiously, his face a mixture of concern for Willow and desperate eagerness to see his child. When his eyes fell on the small bundle in his wife's arms, he stopped in his tracks, overwhelmed by emotion. "Come meet your son," Willow said softly, shifting slightly to make room for him on the edge of the bed. Moving as if in a dream, Grant sat beside them, one hand gently touching the baby's dark head. "A boy," he breathed. "Our son. Would you like to hold him?" With exquisite care, Grant took the baby into his arms, his large hands suddenly gentle as they cradled the tiny form. "Hello, little one," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa." As if in response, the baby's eyes opened briefly newborn blue, but with a hint of the shape and expressiveness that characterized Grant's gaze. "What shall we name him?" Willow asked, watching the two most important people in her world begin to know each other. Grant looked thoughtful. "I've been considering that. What do you think of Walter James? For your father and mine." Willow's heart swelled at the thoughtfulness of his suggestion. "It's perfect." "Walter James Rivers." She reached out to touch the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, little one. You are so very loved." The others tactfully withdrew, leaving the new family alone for these precious first moments together. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with the promise of a new day, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from that moment of misunderstanding at the train station to this perfect culmination of love. The train had left, and she hadn't looked back. Grant had looked right at her when everyone else looked away. And now they gazed together at the future embodied in their son, their hearts full of gratitude for second chances and the courage to trust in love. As years passed in Mineral Park, the story of Willow and Grant Rivers became something of a local legend. How she had almost left on the eastbound train, how he had refused to let her go without fighting for their love, how their marriage had bridged two worlds and produced children who combined the best of both. Walter James, their firstborn, grew into a thoughtful boy with his father's build and his mother's love of learning. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Elizabeth Margaret, whose fiery spirit and independence reminded everyone of both her mother and her grandmother. A third child, Thomas Henry, completed their family 5 years after that, a surprise blessing, who combined his brother's thoughtfulness with his sister's determination. Grant expanded the Rivers ranch holdings, implementing innovative breeding and land management techniques that Walter Northcott, who did indeed invest in Montana ventures, helped finance. Their partnership brought prosperity not just to the Rivers family, but to the wider Mineral Park community, as the ranch employed more hands and the cattle operation grew. Willow continued teaching for many years, eventually becoming headmistress when Mineral Park built a proper school building with multiple classrooms. Under her guidance, education in the frontier town achieved standards that rivaled Eastern establishments, drawing favorable attention from territorial officials and eventually state education boards when Montana achieved statehood in 1889. Elizabeth and Walter Northcott visited Montana regularly as the years passed, gradually coming to appreciate the beauty and opportunity of the Western Territory. Eventually, they purchased a summer home in Mineral Park, spending several months each year near their grandchildren, and acknowledging, though Elizabeth more readily than Walter, that their daughter had indeed made the right choice for her happiness. As Walter James approached his 18th year, preparing to attend university in Denver just as his father had done, Willow and Grant celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The celebration, held at the expanded Rivers Ranch House, brought together family and friends who had witnessed their journey from its uncertain beginnings to its flourishing present. Late in the evening, as music played and their children danced with friends in the barn decorated with lanterns and summer flowers, Grant led Willow away from the festivities toward the quiet hillside where they had often come during their courtship. 20 years, he marveled, holding her hand as they walked beneath a sky ablaze with stars. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you standing at that train station, looking so determined to leave. And sometimes it feels like we've always been together, Willow replied, leaning against his solid strength. As if my life before you was just preparation for our real story. They reached the crest of the hill, where Grant had arranged a blanket and a bottle of champagne, a luxury rarely seen in Mineral Park. As they settled on the blanket, looking out over the ranch buildings illuminated by the full moon, Willow felt a wave of gratitude for the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Grant asked suddenly. "Staying in Montana, you could have had a very different life in Boston." Willow turned to face him, taking in the features that had become so dear to her, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepened by years of sun and laughter, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples, the mouth that still curved into the smile that had first captured her heart. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "This land, this life with you, it's more than I ever dreamed possible when I first came west. You've given me a home, a family, a purpose. What could Boston have offered to compare with that?" Grant's eyes, still that same intense gray that could read her so well, studied her face. You've given me just as much, Willow. More. You challenged me to be a better man, to see beyond the horizons of what I knew. Our children have your spirit, your intelligence. I see you in them every day, and thank God you stayed. He poured champagne into 2 glasses, handing one to her. To 20 years of loving you, he said, raising his glass in toast, and to 20 more, God willing. To us, she agreed, touching her glass to his. To the train that left without me, and the cowboy who was looking right at me when I needed it most. As they sipped the champagne, the sounds of celebration drifted up from the ranch below, music and laughter, the voices of their children and friends, the life they had created together. The Montana night wrapped around them like a familiar embrace, the land that had witnessed their beginning now cradling their continuing story. Grant set aside his glass and drew Willow into his arms, his kiss as tender and passionate as when they were newly wed. "I'm still looking right at you, Willow Rivers," he murmured against her lips, "and I always will be." In that perfect moment, with the past honored and the future stretching bright before them, Willow knew with absolute certainty that staying in Mineral Park had been the best decision of her life. The train had left that day long ago, carrying away doubt and missed opportunities, but leaving behind the chance for true happiness with the man who had seen her worth when she herself had almost forgotten it. And in the years that followed, as their children grew into adulthood, as grandchildren eventually came to enliven their later years, as Mineral Park transformed from frontier town to thriving community, Grant remained true to his word. Through all life's changes and challenges, joys and sorrows, he kept looking right at her, his love as steady and enduring as the Montana mountains that had become their home.